Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
She had a terrible and realistic dream. Sakura wanted to cover her eyes with her hands so as not to see him, but her hands wouldn't obey. Neither did the rest of her body. She was a hostage to her subconscious, a silent witness, forced to look at something she was terrified to even think about. The girl knew it was a dream and desperately tried to wake up. She felt like she'd open her eyes any minute and find herself in her own bed. She'd hear her mother calling her for breakfast. After a little nap, she'd look out the window and admire the bustling Konoha. But the nightmare didn't stop. Horrific images played over and over in the girl's head, Rasengan and Chidori colliding, killing their wielders. Suddenly, Sakura's eyes flew open. Her heart was pounding as if it were trying to break through her ribs. Her legs were numb, and her temples were throbbing. "Finally woke up," Kakashi said. Still drowsy, Sakura stared at the sky for a few seconds, illuminated by the sun's crimson rays. Her palms were sweaty, and her stomach felt like snakes were crawling. She couldn't remember what she dreamed, but she knew for sure it was something bad. The young Kunoichi looked at her mentor, hoping to see his usual indifference and calm in his eyes. But his gaze only intensified her anxiety. A nasty premonition stirred deep within her. Kakashi looked at her with longing. Sakura's heart sank. She asked, "Where are Sasuke and Naruto?" "They have come together in their final battle to settle everything once and for all," the teacher said quietly, lowering his gaze. It felt like a thin needle had been pierced into the girl's heart, causing unbearable pain. Of course, deep down, she already knew it all. But that didn't make it any easier. Tears began to well up in her eyes. "You swore to protect them, to be as strong as they are. And now you sit here and whine while they fight to the death," the girl's inner voice scolded. Sakura bit her lip, wiped her eyes with her tattered, dirty sleeve and said, "We need to find them before they kill each other." "I don't think that's a good idea," Kakashi countered. "You've seen their strength. I don't want you to get hurt too. But we can't abandon them," the girl cried out angrily, feeling a tear finally trickle down her cheek. "Sakura, pull yourself together. This is their fight, and we shouldn't interfere. Let them finish it themselves." The sensei hesitated and looked away, whatever the outcome. However, the girl didn't like this scenario at all. Anger compounded the nasty premonition. "I'm not going to sit back and do nothing. They might need my help. Stay if you want. I'll be going." Haruno tried to get up. However, it wasn't so easy. Her chakra hadn't yet recovered, so she couldn't heal herself. But the anticipation of the inevitable was far worse than the pain. "You're still exhausted. Even if you wanted to, you wouldn't be able to help them." "I'll still try," the girl said, gritting her teeth. "Naruto would have definitely come to the rescue, so it's my duty to do the same." Kakashi didn't answer. Sakura took a deep breath, gathered her strength, and stood up. The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains. Its last rays illuminated the eerie cocoons hanging from the divine tree. Within them were all her comrades. "After all, if they kill each other, who will dispel Tsukiyomi?" the girl asked quietly. Taking one last look at the horrific landscape, Sakura turned away and walked in the opposite direction. "Hey!" the sensei called out to her. "I can't leave you alone. Help me up." The girl felt a slight sense of relief and a twinge of guilt for snapping at Kakashi. She walked over to the teacher and helped him up. "Thank you," Sakura muttered. "They're as dear to me as they are to you," he said. "But I still think Naruto and Sasuke wouldn't want us interfering." The mentor suffered far more than she did. Kakashi had to be held back during the journey, which resulted in their speed being unforgivably slow. They both knew where their destination was, the Valley of the End. No doubt Naruto and Sasuke were heading there to put an end to their journey. Haruno and Itachi traveled all night. And the closer they got to the valley, the more anxious the girl became. They barely spoke. Words weren't necessary, for it was clear their thoughts and fears were on the same page. Despite extreme fatigue and pain, the teacher and student didn't stop for a second. When the rays of the rising sun finally touched the treetops, Sakura and Kakashi reached the edge of the forest, which ended in a cliff. They exchanged glances. "It's suspiciously quiet here," the teacher said. Sakura didn't answer. Holding her breath, she slowly approached the cliff and then gasped. The statues of Madara and Hashirama had been razed to the ground. The girl's gaze wandered over the ruins and finally saw them. The boys were lying by the river. Both had lost their arms. Her heart sank. Because of their height, Sakura couldn't see if the boys were alive. She quickly jumped off the cliff and headed toward them. "Sasuke, Naruto," but no one answered. Sakura made one last push, fell to her knees, and pressed her ear to her lover's chest. The heart was not beating. "No, this can't be," the girl muttered. With a sharp movement, she turned to Naruto and did the same. Haruno closed her eyes and began to listen, desperately hoping to hear a heartbeat. And suddenly, she heard a weak, barely noticeable knock. "Alive!" Sakura whispered. And, mobilizing all her remaining strength, the girl began resuscitation efforts. This was the second time in recent memory that she had to save Naruto's life. However, this time the task was far more difficult. Her chakra was practically depleted. Sakura desperately tried not to think about the dead body of her loved one lying nearby. She had to save her friend. She knew all the necessary actions by heart: scan the body, identify damage, heal wounds. And as soon as the girl placed her palms on Naruto's chest, he spoke up. "Sakura-chan," Uzumaki said hoarsely. "Shut up. Save your strength. I'm trying to save you." The boy started coughing. 2 streams of blood ran from his nose and mouth. It became clear that her efforts were futile. 13 ribs were broken. His lungs were punctured in 3 places and rapidly filling with fluid. His liver and spleen were ruptured. Furthermore, her friend had lost too much blood. Something inside the girl snapped, but she didn't give up hope. "I'll patch you up now, Naruto. Don't worry," she said, feeling a twinge of guilt at how false her voice sounded. "Sakura-chan, don't. This is definitely my end. I'm sorry. I promise not to give up." The boy began coughing again. His face, already scarred by the beating, twisted in pain. The teacher's hand fell on the girl's shoulder as he finally came down. Naruto gathered the last of his strength, took a deep breath, and hoarsely muttered, "Kakashi-sensei, take the Rinnegan from Sasuke. Please save everyone." "Without the tail beast's chakra, this is impossible," he replied. "I know I'm placing an unbearable burden on you, but we couldn't handle it." The eyes of the ever-cheerful boy began to fill with tears. The kunoichi took Naruto's hand and quietly promised, "We'll think of something." "Yes, Naruto. Don't worry about everyone. You can rest now," the teacher added in a calm, soothing voice. "Thank you, Sakura-chan, Kakashi-sensei." And, giving them his last smile, Naruto Uzumaki closed his eyes, plunging into eternal darkness. The world spun. It felt like the air had been squeezed out of her lungs. The girl reached for Sasuke's hand, squeezed theirs with all her might, and bowed her head. A loud, unnatural scream erupted from Sakura's chest. It was impossible. It shouldn't have happened. "We're late," Kakashi said quietly. These words made the pain even worse. It felt like 1,000 explosive tags were being detonated in Sakura's chest. It became difficult to breathe. Sensei knelt down next to her and pulled her into his arms. The girl, choking on tears, buried her face in her mentor's shoulder. He placed his hand on the back of her head and said in a trembling voice, "Forgive me, Sakura. I should have come earlier and stopped them." He held the pink-haired girl close, trying his best to contain his emotions. He couldn't be weak. He couldn't show tears. A shinobi wasn't allowed to give in to his emotions. The man had expected this outcome and, deep down, knew he couldn't influence it. But did that make it any easier? He failed again. He lost his friends again. No, Sasuke and Naruto were something more. Kakashi lost his sons. Memories of his students' childhood flashed through his head. Training missions. The noodles he'd fed the perpetually hungry Naruto in Ichiraku. Cold, distant Sasuke, so reminiscent of Kakashi's youth. It was strange to even remember that time now, as if it had happened in someone else's life. These children freed him from the depths of darkness when it seemed nothing could help. Thanks to Team 7, Kakashi regained his sense of life. Of course, nothing could heal his guilt over Rin and Obito. However, Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura managed to fill the gaping hole in his seemingly stone heart. The young Kunoichi, who by all rights should have been destined to live a happy life, was now sobbing inconsolably on her sensei's shoulder. The shinobi world was too far removed from the word justice. This simple truth had seared an unhealing wound into his soul since his youth. Kakashi wished he could disabuse himself of this and no longer bear the pain, but the cruel reality constantly reminded him of itself. "Look at them, you've screwed up again," the inner voice said. "This is your curse, to watch your loved ones die and be powerless in the face of death." But there was no time for self-flagellation. A much more serious problem needed to be addressed. A crazy idea popped into Kakashi's head, but he didn't voice it yet. "Sakura, you have to transplant my Rinnegan, just like Naruto said." But the girl seemed not to hear. "Why did it all end like this?" Sakura asked breathlessly. "We almost won." "Why?" Kakashi had no answer to this question. He wanted to somehow console her, to find the right words. But all he could do was curse fate for this outcome and the burden that now fell on their shoulders. However, a true shinobi had no right to surrender. Guy, though gravely injured, was still alive. Tsunade-sama and the other Kage were too. After all, everyone he knew was on the divine tree. The life of every survivor of the war now depended on Sakura and Kakashi. He repeated his request again. "We must gather our courage. For them, and for the whole world. We don't have much time. The eternal Tsukuyomi will gradually destroy everyone caught in it." The Kunoichi freed herself from Sensei's embrace and said, sobbing, "You yourself said we can't do anything without the tailed beast's chakra. Sasuke's jutsu, which trapped the beasts in stone prisons, has surely worn off. Do you think they'll help us if we can find them?" "No, I doubt it. With the Rinnegan, I could subdue them, but it's too risky, and it would take a long time, too." The tears stopped flowing from Sakura's eyes. She steeled herself and began to listen attentively. Kakashi continued, "Now you'll transplant the Rinnegan into me. Then we'll bury Sasuke and Naruto here in the Valley of the End. I think that's the most fitting end for them. And then we'll recuperate a bit, get some food, and get started on the plan." The man tried to speak calmly, not betraying his anxiety. What he had planned was insane. Moreover, Kakashi didn't really believe they would succeed. He returned his gaze to the dead bodies of his former students. The blood flowing from the stumps of Sasuke and Naruto's arms dried and merged into a single line. "How symbolic," thought the teacher. "Finally, they are not chasing each other, but rather seem to be holding hands. Sakura, I think they've finally made peace and are now looking at us with hope," Kakashi said quietly. "We mustn't let them down." "Yes," the girl agreed. "They shouldn't." The teacher nodded. "Good. Are you ready for the transplant?" "Give me a couple more minutes," Sakura asked, turning away. Kakashi didn't rush her and decided she needed some time alone. Frankly, the sensei couldn't bear to continue looking at his students. Just yesterday, he'd witnessed the team's triumphant reunion, and today he'd be burying most of it. The sun had already risen over the valley. Clouds began to appear from behind the cliff. Birds flew across the sky as before, and the wind caressed the grass and leaves of the trees. The world continued to live, unaware that its inhabitants might very soon come to an end. Kakashi slowly walked to the nearly dry river and washed his face. Then he filled his canteen with water. His stomach had been empty for several days. There was no time to think about food at war. For a moment, the man turned back to look at the boys. Sakura gave in to her emotions. She touched her lips to Sasuke's forehead and pressed herself against the dead boy with all her might. Poor girl. She loved him no matter what. Will she ever recover from this? Unlikely. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura called. I'm ready. Let's begin. A painful sense of déjà vu washed over him. Nearly 18 years had passed since the day he received the Sharingan. And once again, Kakashi was destined to take what shouldn't be his. Once again, in war, he was receiving a trophy he hadn't asked for. The legacy of a great dead clan. After all, Sasuke, unlike Obito, will never return to life. But Kakashi would think about the Uchiha clan's demise forever later. He approached Sakura and sat down next to her. Her face was swollen from tears, but she was no longer crying. Her gaze was focused and serious. As always, though, when the matter became truly important. The procedure took only a few minutes. When the Rinnegan finally entered the left eye socket, a sharp pain seared my head, and tears mixed with blood began to stream down my cheek. Damn, he muttered, pressing his palm to his new eye. His head spun from a surge of extraordinary power. Kakashi closed his eyes and tried to adjust to the unfamiliar sensation. He knew those eyes held immense power, but he had no idea just how much. Are you okay? Sakura asked worriedly. Yes, the teacher nodded. Everything is fine. He looked at the girl and clearly saw the chakra, or rather, what remained of it, coursing through her body. His own strength was also waning, so, with a sad smile, he lowered the eye patch over his left eye and quietly said, I didn't even have time to get used to it. Sakura looked down and clenched her hands into fists. If we can do this, and the world survives this, I hope they build statues of Naruto and Sasuke here, she muttered. There are no ifs. We'll get through this. It can't be any other way. The teacher encouraged her. But what is the plan? What should we do? I'll tell you everything later. First, let's bury them. We need to lift the bodies up onto the cliff, otherwise the river might wash them away during the floods. Sakura nodded, stood up, and helped Kakashi up. They scooped up Naruto's lifeless body and headed upstairs. They did the same with Sasuke. Sakura hugged him one last time, breaking down in tears once again. I'm sorry, Sensei. It's too painful, she justified herself. The teacher didn't answer. He, too, decided to say goodbye. Crouching down, he ran his hand through Naruto's spiky blonde hair. More than anything, he wanted to see his student's radiant smile once more and listen to his naive talk about the need to always strive for one's goal. Naruto, you never got to fulfill your dream. You would have been a great Hokage. But that's not how the world works, Kakashi said quietly. Then he turned to Sasuke. Your life has been full of struggle and disappointment. Your dream of reviving the clan will never come true. By Itachi's will, you set out on a path that led you into darkness. I hope you've found the light now. Using earth elemental powers, Kakashi created 2 graves, into which they carefully placed the lifeless bodies. Then, forming the seals of a tiger, rabbit, pig, and dog, the man used the earthen wall technique to create 2 neat slabs. Sakura squatted down and used a chakra scalpel to write the names of her best friends on the graves. Now their ninja ways are over, Kakashi concluded. Goodbye, Sakura muttered, grimacing from the renewed pain. The wind grew stronger, driving clouds and fluttering Sakura's pink hair. She and Kakashi remained silent. So quiet that Sakura felt as if she could hear her own heartbeat. The kunoichi knelt, peering at the freshly laid stone slabs, but pretending not to see them. Before her eyes stood a terrible landscape of destruction and the bodies of her dead friends. However, the tears ran out, And now in my head and heart there was only a gaping, frightening emptiness. No thoughts, no aspirations, no desires. Sakura didn't want to save the world. She didn't want to think about her comrades either. If it weren't for her sensei, she probably would have dug her own grave and laid herself down next to her friends. All she could do now was sit there by the gravestones and remain silent. The war had begun only 3 days ago, but Sakura felt like a lifetime had passed. She felt sorry for herself, which made her feel ashamed. You fool! Should shinobi feel sorry for themselves? Pull yourself together. How pathetic you are! However, she was not only a shinobi, but also an ordinary 17-year-old girl who suddenly lost everything. They sat like that for about 40 minutes until Kakashi said, "Sakura, we need to keep going. Time is running out." The kunoichi looked up at her teacher. Her hands were in her pockets, her posture casual, her gaze once again filled with the familiar indifference. A strange, combustible mixture of emotions flared in her stomach, feelings that were definitely out of place right now. Annoyance, disappointment, resentment. The girl lowered her eyes, clutched the fabric of her tattered turtleneck, and asked in a low voice, "You don't feel anything at all?" Kakashi remained silent. It wasn't his habit to answer such questions, and Sakura understood this perfectly well. She knew the sensei too well. Cold, reasonable. Just like she remembered Sasuke. Sakura looked at the indifferent face again and said barely audibly, "Don't answer if you don't want to. I know exactly what you're going to tell me anyway." She stood up, her face raised to the sky, her eyes closed. The wind began to ruffle Sakura's tangled hair even more violently. She pressed her palms to her chest, as if checking to see if she was alive. Unfortunately, he is more alive than all the living. "Sakura," Kakashi said hesitantly, "we need to catch our breath. There's no point in discord. Everything depends on our actions." "Yes, I know," the girl replied angrily, turning sharply to face the teacher. "You behave worse than Sai." Kakashi's eyebrow, not hidden by the bandage, rose in surprise, but very quickly his face returned to its previous indifferent look. Haruno understood that Sensei completely undeserved her anger. He shouldn't have shared her grief and suddenly become emotional. Now it seemed to her as if Kakashi's trembling voice after Naruto's death had simply been her imagination. She suddenly felt acutely how lonely she had become. "If you want to be angry with me, then be angry. If it makes it easier for you to cope with your grief, I don't mind," said the sensei. These words made her heart grow even colder, and Sakura's anger faded. She pretended to ignore his remark and changed the subject. "Tell me the plan, Kakashi-sensei. What do you think we should do?" "I already told you, Sakura. We need to rest and discuss everything with a fresh mind. Now is not the best time." She pursed her lips and spent a few seconds choosing her words so as not to blurt out anything unnecessary again. Then she asked, "At least tell me where we are going." "To Konoha. But first, we'll set up camp nearby and I'll get us some food. Rest here for now, restore your chakra. You'll need to heal me." Sakura merely nodded and turned away again, hearing her sensei disappear into the depths of the forest. She slowly approached the cliff and looked down. Thoughts of Hinata suddenly crept into her mind. They had never been friends, except perhaps through unrequited love. The girl smiled sadly. At least she fought, sought a way to Sasuke, albeit to no avail. Hinata had always lacked resolve. Who knows, if she'd been a little braver, she probably would have spent a few happy days with Naruto. What would she feel like now? How would she tell this poor girl that the love of her life was gone? Sakura felt a painful pang in her soul. She didn't know what was harder, dispelling Tsukuyomi or sharing this news. The girl sat on the edge of the cliff, her knees drawn up, and looked at the shattered statues. Only now did she notice that the only thing that hadn't shattered into pieces were the palms of the stone Hashirama and Madara. By a strange coincidence, the the hands of the greatest rivals had formed the sign of reconciliation, stained with the dried blood of Sasuke and Naruto. A pang of frustration stabbed through her chest again. Sakura folded her hands in her lap and rested her chin on them. At that moment, a terrible and wrong thought entered her head. What if they just left everything as is? No plans, no attempt to dispel Tsukuyomi? Sakura even felt a moment of envy. All her comrades were now envisioning their perfect lives. Hinata, probably with Naruto. Ino, most likely with Sasuke. What would Sakura's dream be about? She pushed the idiotic thoughts away. How foolish these thoughts were. With a heavy sigh, the girl lay down on her back. The clouds were gathering. It looked like rain was coming soon. It seemed even the world was about to mourn a little for the two great shinobi who had ended the war. Sakura spread her arms wide and felt the thin stems of tall grass with her right palm. She lifted her fingers higher and gently ran her fingertips over them, closing her eyes. She tried to imagine that she wasn't touching plants at all, but Sasuke's hair, black as the darkest night. Goosebumps ran across her skin, and soon Sakura was overcome by fatigue and a kind of painful for satisfaction. Sakura! Someone's hand touched her cheek. She stood up abruptly and looked around in fear. It was dark. Was she dead? You slept all day, Kakashi said in a half-whisper. You need to eat. Horrible events rushed into her memories without warning, and the girl's soul was once again filled with a burning emptiness. She sighed and touched her forehead with her palm. Her head was splitting. Sakura's eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness. She sat near a nearly extinguished fire. There were no graves nearby. Where are we? Sakura asked, raising her eyebrows in surprise. I moved you here and set up a small camp. Meat was roasting over the fire. A breeze blew, and the girl smelled the aroma. Her stomach immediately twisted unpleasantly. She hadn't even noticed how hungry she was. What time is it now? Around 10 o'clock in the evening. Kakashi approached the fire, placed the fragrant pieces on a large leaf he'd prepared earlier, and pulled something else out of his vest pocket. In the darkness, Sakura couldn't make out what it was. I came across a couple of hares and an elderberry tree in the forest. It's actually quite a toxic berry, but it's good for you in small quantities. So we've got a pretty complete dinner. The teacher seemed to smile. Because of the darkness and her mask, Sakura couldn't tell for sure. Approaching the student again, the man handed her the food. Thank you, Sakura muttered and took the sheet on which lay 2 rabbit legs and a bunch of black berries. The smell of delicious food made her insides ache even more. Without a second's hesitation, the girl greedily pounced on her dinner. Kakashi smiled again, closing his eyes, as he always did, and approached the fire again. I also found some mint, so we'll have some tea. Sakura was no longer angry with the teacher. Now she felt ashamed for snapping at him that morning. Having eaten her fill, the girl felt better. Putting aside the sheet of paper with the seeds, she moved closer to the fire. Sitting down, Sakura looked down and began tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Kakashi-sensei, I'd like to apologize for this morning. I don't know what I was thinking. The teacher interrupted her. Sakura, you have nothing to worry about. Everything is fine. Okay, the girl replied, but she felt that the feeling of guilt had not gone away. Kakashi boiled water directly in the flask, then sprinkled mint leaves into it. For a brief moment, Sakura thought everything was fine, and they were just on a routine mission. They'd have some tea, rest, and then head out on another stupid mission in the morning. However, reality struck Sakura hard again. She became flustered, clasped her hands, and began nervously fiddling with her fingers. A question swirled around in her head, but she wasn't sure it was appropriate to ask. Ask, said the sensei, noticing the student's behavior. Nothing escapes his gaze. Sakura timidly raised her eyes, took a deep breath, and exhaled, asking, Kakashi-sensei, what would your eternal Tsukuyomi be? The question caught the teacher off guard. The eyebrow above his right eye rose. He stared at the student for a few seconds, then turned his gaze to the fire. Let me think, Kakashi muttered, rubbing his chin. Sakura also looked at the smoldering embers, once again contemplating her eternal sleep. The mentor, speaking thoughtfully and somewhat drawlingly, spoke. I probably would have been the Hokage's right-hand man, but not under Tsunade-sama or anyone else, but under Obito. My friend, Ren, would still be alive. You know, he plunged into darkness precisely because of her death. I would have wanted them to be together. Perhaps I would have become sensei for their child. Truth be told, Sakura hadn't expected such revelations, and wasn't at all sure Kakashi would answer such a personal question. She didn't even know what to say. However, the man himself continued speaking. But I would have assumed that before Naruto and Sasuke died. Kakashi pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, removed the flask from the fire, set it on the ground, and leaned it against a small rock next to him, letting the drink cool. Now, it's hard to say. Perhaps in my Tsukuyomi, you would be my students again on Team 7. There was silence, but not the awkward kind that happens during a boring conversation when you don't know how to continue the conversation. It was a silence far more eloquent than any words. Sensei touched the flask with his finger, checking if it was cool enough. Then he handed the tea to the girl. Sakura took the container and carefully took a sip of the aromatic drink. A pleasant warmth spread through her insides. She thought about how, even in a perfect version of reality, her teacher thought about his friends. A little selfish, isn't it? He asked, smiling again and breaking the silence. Not at all, Sakura said quietly. On the contrary, her dreams now seemed like complete nonsense. Although Kakashi didn't ask the student a question in return, she still spoke in a low voice. Before all this, I would have said that in my Tsukuyomi, I would have been equal in strength to Sasuke and Naruto, finally caught up with them, walking hand in hand next to them. Don't get me wrong, I don't consider myself weak. But truth be told, I was always 10 steps behind. And also, Sakura felt the blood rush to her cheeks. Sasuke would finally be with me. Kakashi stared at the girl, unwavering. She glanced at him briefly and noticed the indifference had once again vanished from her teacher's face. The kunoichi felt a fresh wave of pain threatening to burst into her heart. Suppressing the lump in her throat, she continued, Well now, all I want is to see them alive. The girl bit her lower lip, trying to drown out the emotional pain with physical pain. But it was no use. The hand holding the flask of tea began to tremble. Kakashi noticed this, carefully took the container, and touched his student's shoulder with his other hand. Sakura, you asked me this morning if I felt anything? Of course I do. But first and foremost, I need to remain a shinobi, and see this through to the end, making every effort to keep you alive. After these words, guilt was added to the unbearable pain. She no longer had the strength to hold back her tears. Sakura drew her knees up, clasped her head in her hands, and whined like a cornered animal. The mentor sat closer and hugged the girl as tightly as he had in the morning. The pain is passing, Sakura, Kakashi said quietly. You'll never forget it. It will live with you until the end of your days, but eventually it will get easier. Salvation will be found in those close to you. The girl had no answer. She had no one closer than them. So, if she reasoned like that, she was never destined to escape her grief. So, having calmed down a bit, she freed herself from the teacher's embrace and asked the question that had been in her head that morning. What if Madara and Obito were right? What if we don't need to dispel the eternal Tsukuyomi? Well, and the heart. The heart wanted peace. Not just for itself. He wished he could agree with Sakura, abandon his comrades, and end his life like this, watering the world, sitting by the fire, gradually coming to terms with the pain. For a few moments, the thought even crossed his mind that they could, with time, become more than just teacher and student. But this was too much. Kakashi shook his head slightly, dispelling the negative thoughts, and looked into the distance, pondering his answer. He pulled back his mask, revealing himself to a stranger for the first time in years, and took a sip of mint tea from his flask. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the girl's eyebrows rise in surprise, but she quickly looked away. Now he had nothing to hide, and he didn't really want to. But in reality, Sakura had been wrong to assume Kakashi felt nothing. And even though her teacher had masterfully mastered the art of hiding his emotions, deep down he wanted her to see it on his face. The sensei was in excruciating pain. But he was a shinobi, and until his last breath, whenever it came, he would remain one. Kakashi took another sip of tea, pulled his mask back on, handed the flask to Sakura, and held his palms out toward the fire. "We have no moral right to leave the world immersed in the eternal Tsukuyami," he said quietly. "Why not? Don't our friends deserve to be happy after everything they've been through?" Sakura retorted hotly. Kakashi frowned and answered decisively. "They deserved it, and everyone deserves to make a choice. Neither Madara nor Obito had the right to make decisions for the others. And you and I certainly don't have that right." The man turned his gaze to the girl. She peered closely into his face. "She's probably trying to examine my emotions again," he thought. "It's too late now. Why did you turn away when I took off the stupid mask?" Then Sakura pulled her knees up, lowered her face, and muttered, "I know you're right, and I think so too. But there are no buts here." The sensei interrupted the student. "There is a duty that must be fulfilled." Sakura smiled sadly. "But I still don't know what debt exactly you're talking about." She paused for a few moments. "You think I'm weak, right? That's why you won't talk about the plan?" Kakashi's heart sank. He bit his lip against the overwhelming guilt. Such thoughts hadn't even crossed his mind. All he really wanted was to spare Sakura from the inevitable choice for as long as possible. Today, as he was getting them dinner, all he could think about was the plan. And no matter how he approached it, the idea was disgusting and unacceptable. Kakashi didn't fully understand how it worked, but he knew for sure there would be a price to pay. So he justified himself. "Sakura, it's not like that at all. I don't really understand how to implement what I've planned, and I don't like throwing words to the wind." The girl smiled bitterly. "Well, yes. You don't know anything, but you're firmly convinced that we need to go to Konoha." He chuckled. So that's how she saw him. Someone who considered himself superior to everyone else. Kakashi had wanted so much to escape that image, had tried so hard to live differently, and in the end, it had all been in vain. He sat face to face with the only person close to him, yet Sakura didn't seem to consider him close. It wasn't enough to rip the mask off his face. He had to unveil his thoughts as well. Kakashi took a deep breath and said, "We need to find a scroll with a forbidden technique of the second Hokage that you know about." He paused and began rubbing his forehead, as if stalling for time and choosing his words. "I never thought I'd seriously consider using it, but hard times call for hard decisions. This may be our only chance." Sakura turned to the sensei. She frowned for a few seconds, then widened her eyes and pressed her hand to her lips. The man realized his student had figured it out. She was always quick-witted. "Are you really going to use Unholy Resurrection?" she muttered in horror. Kakashi looked down and sighed heavily. "What are our options? I can't control the tailed beasts. Even Madara had a hard time controlling them, and I certainly don't have that kind of chakra reserves. But Sasuke locked them in stone prisons with just one glance." Sakura objected. "Sasuke could do it because he got the Rinnegan from Hagoromo. My eye doesn't work that well either." Sakura carefully, as if choosing her words, clarified. "And you're going to resurrect them both?" "Unfortunately, no. If I understand correctly, we'll have to." Kakashi trailed off and, coughing, continued, "Pay a price. In exchange for resurrection, we'll need to make a sacrifice." Sakura continued her cautious assumptions. "Since we already have the Rinnegan, and only Naruto had the tail beast's chakra. Yes, Kakashi nodded. We'll have to resurrect him. Before burying the boys, I plucked a few hairs from the guy and saved them. Just in case. Sensei slapped his breast pocket to prove his point. The girl smiled mirthlessly. So you planned this from the very beginning? Kakashi didn't look at his student, feeling a slight pang of conscience. I planned to fulfill my duty, but I didn't fully understand how. And who are you planning to sacrifice? The girl continued to ask cautiously. No one yet. I haven't thought about it yet. First, I need to find the scroll with the technique and then study it. The girl pursed her lips and turned away. Kakashi guessed what she was thinking and quietly muttered, Sakura, I will never let you die. But the student said nothing in response. A lingering silence descended again. Kakashi desperately wanted to talk about something else, to break the sticky, unpleasant silence. But the girl did it herself. It's late. Let's go to bed. Tomorrow I'll treat you, and we'll head to the Hidden Leaf. Lightning flashed somewhere in the distance, and a few seconds later a loud rumble of thunder was heard. The wind began to pick up, swaying the treetops. A few leaves fell to the ground. Goosebumps ran across Kakashi's skin. The temperature was growing colder. Autumn was finally coming into its own. I'll build us some tents out of dirt. It looks like it's going to rain soon. Then he stood up, walked a few meters away, and made the necessary seals twice. 2 miniature dugouts sprang up next to the fire. The man then headed for the nearest tree. Besides food, he gathered some grass and leaves to construct something resembling a sleeping platform. Sakura stood up, took some of the plants from the teacher and quietly thanked him. Thank you for taking care of me. I'm really no good for anything. I didn't even think about a place to stay for the night. And swallowing back tears, the girl turned away and ducked into the makeshift shelter. Kakashi didn't think Sakura was worthless at all, but again, he couldn't find the right words. So, consumed by guilt, he hung his head and wandered back to his hut. He sat down by the entrance, pulled off his mask, drew his knees up, and touched the bandage covering his Rinnegan with his palm. His fingers began to grip the fabric of their own accord, and Kakashi squeezed his eyes shut. Damn! 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 He cursed through his teeth so that Sakura wouldn't hear anything. The thunder rumbled again. The man raised his head and held his palm out to the street. The wind immediately hit it with a strong gust. It smelled of dampness and wet earth. Then a few large drops fell on the teacher's palm, and at that very moment, a heavy rain began to fall. Well, even nature couldn't calmly come to terms with what had happened. Kakashi touched his cheek with his wet palm. It sent shivers down his spine. Despite the incredible fatigue he was feeling, he didn't feel like sleeping at all. And he didn't really need to rest. There was no one left to fight anyway. He sighed heavily and dropped his head onto the grass that had been laid out as a bed. Just 24 hours ago, he'd seen his best friend die for the second time. Obito. Who would have thought that this cheerful boy would turn into a monster for love? For love. The phrase made the man's heart skip a beat. Now, with the world hanging over a hellish abyss, he suddenly felt sad that he had never allowed himself to love. Kakashi knew he had been attracted to many women, but he had never let them into his heart. Because I was a coward. I lied to myself that I didn't want any of this. But in reality, I was always afraid of pain. Kakashi cursed again. Realizing he definitely wouldn't be able to sleep, he jerked upright and stepped out into the rain. Giant drops began to pound his silver-haired head with all their might. But he rather enjoyed it. He took a deep breath of fresh air and turned his face to the sky. And suddenly, above the deafening roar of the rain, the man heard an unnatural howl. For a second, he tensed and braced himself, expecting an attack. However, the next instant, he realized it wasn't a howl at all, but bitter hysteria. Kakashi walked quickly to Sakura's sleeping quarters. He exhaled shakily, trying to think of the right words, and crouched down by the entrance. The rain was so heavy that water from his hair ran down the back of his neck and onto his palms. But he didn't notice. The girl quieted down, clearly noticing him. The darkness and the downpour made it difficult to see anything until suddenly the dugout was momentarily illuminated by a bright blue flash of lightning. Sakura was kneeling in the corner, her palms and forehead resting against the dirty wall. The man lowered the cloth and spoke. "If you want to be alone, I understand." The only response was a timid sob. I can't stay away while you're in this state." And again, an eloquent, bitter silence. Kakashi clenched and unclenched his fists, hesitating to enter. It was ironic that his eye could once replicate the most complex technique, but not a single Sharingan could imitate the ability to truly support his loved ones. But now, everything was completely different. The walls, even the strongest, were about to crumble. He stood up and, crouching, entered the dugout. Kakashi walked slowly towards Sakura and sank to the ground next to her, leaning his back against the wall. He placed his hand on his student's shoulder and exhaled loudly. For a brief moment, lightning flashed across the house again and thunder rumbled again. The words caught in his throat again. So the man only tightened his grip on Sakura's shoulder. And suddenly, the girl threw herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. Without thinking, the teacher hugged the girl tightly, feeling his palms tremble treacherously, and a lump rise in his throat. He rested his forehead on the top of the girl's head and bit his lip. "I'm all wet because of the rain. Be careful," he began to say, but then stopped. Did it matter? Words were unnecessary. The embrace was what kept them afloat. Simple closeness, the warmth of a familiar person, the need to feel each other's pain. "Kakashi-sensei," Sakura said, sobbing. "Stay here." The man was taken aback by this proposal, but didn't have time to object. His student continued, "Don't think anything like that. It's just, I'll go crazy if I'm alone with my thoughts today." Kakashi didn't answer. He reached his wet palm to Sakura's pink-haired crown and began to stroke it, as if lulling her to sleep. Then he muttered, "Get some sleep. I'll be there." They sat like that for another 20 minutes, until exhaustion finally took its toll. And without realizing it, Kakashi and Sakura fell into a restless sleep. Until, a few hours later, a deafening, inhuman roar was heard. She didn't even notice how she'd fallen into a strange, restless half-slumber. Apparently, her teacher's embrace had finally lulled her to sleep. Sakura would have slept until morning if not for a strange, otherworldly cry. The sudden awakening sent her soul stumbling into her heels. She gasped and instinctively touched her chest, as if trying to calm her frantic heartbeat. She glanced quickly toward the street. The sky was gray. So, they had managed to get some more or less normal sleep after all. Kakashi reacted instantly. He jumped up, lifted the bandage from his eye and, before leaving, said, "Sakura, stay here. I'll check what's going on." "No way," the Kunoichi said crisply, and also rose to her feet. The teacher had already stepped outside, looking around in confusion. Sakura quickly followed him and emerged from the dugout. A chilly, rain-scented air hit her nose. The sky was still covered in leaden clouds. Judging by the drops dripping from the leaves, the storm had only recently ended. Her feet sank into the sticky mud beneath the weight of her body. Sakura strained to listen, but a heavy silence hung around her, seeming like she could cut it with a knife. "What was that?" she asked quietly, as if someone could hear them. "I have no idea," Kakashi answered in a hushed voice. Sensei moved toward the forest, trying not to make any unnecessary noise. Suddenly, the vile, reverberating screech repeated itself. It sounded like the howl of some animal, only too loud and unnatural. Sakura felt her heart stop. She froze where she stood, as if rooted to the ground. The teacher glanced quickly at his student and said, "I think I know whose voice this is." A voice? Goosebumps ran down the back of Sakura's neck. The sound sounded more like a distorted animal roar. The girl approached the sensei. He formed a chakra concentrating seal with his fingers, closed his eyes, and quickly said, "I need time to use the Rinnegan. Even though it requires much less chakra than the Sharingan, it's quite difficult to control." Sakura nodded. Her hand instinctively reached for the pouch of kunai that usually hid there. But naturally, after the war, neither the weapon nor the pouch remained. She cursed and began concentrating chakra in her fists, preparing to attack something unknown. And again, a screech. Only this time, Sakura could have sworn she heard laughter in those inhuman, eerie sounds. A shudder ran through her body. She wasn't afraid. She'd been through war, seen horrors and thousands of deaths, buried her best friends, but that sound. It was terrifying to hear, considering that besides her and Kakashi, not a single living soul should have existed at that moment. The man opened his eyes and removed the seal. He frowned and peered into the distance. "I see chakra. A lot of inhuman energy. There's no doubt it's one of the tailed beasts," the teacher said quickly and seriously. "Far?" "No. About a kilometer." "I'll check," Sakura said, and was already getting ready to jump. But the teacher held out his right hand in front of her and shook his head. "I'll do it myself." Before the girl could protest, he concentrated chakra in his legs, pushed off, and leaped up the tree, reaching the very top in a matter of seconds. That was enough for the beast to notice them. "Gotcha!" he screamed furiously. "I knew the last of the sleepless humans were somewhere around here. What fun we're going to have!" Kakashi jumped down and quickly said, "That's Shikaku. He must be bored being free." The sound of running paws echoed through the forest. "How are we going to defeat him?" Sakura exclaimed in fear. Before Kakashi could respond, they heard the sound of breaking trees and the scurry of another beast to their left. They both looked up at the same time and saw long, red tails darting over the treetops. Sakura's eyebrows shot up. She and Kakashi exchanged glances and, without a word, leaped up a tree to see what was happening. The teacher frowned and peered intently into the horizon. "Kurama!" One-Tailed screeched obnoxiously. "What are you doing here?" The tailed beast stopped about 300 meters from Sakura and Kakashi's overnight camp. Both Kurama and Shikaku assumed stances, ready to attack at any moment. Even from this distance, the Nine-Tails first stood on end. It began wagging its tail slowly, and the air currents reached as far as Kakashi and Sakura, attempting to knock them off the branch. "Maybe we should get out while they sort this out?" the girl whispered. The teacher also answered in a whisper. "You're probably right, but it looks like Kurama is on our side." "Let's wait a bit. If a fight breaks out, we'll run away." The fox's loud, bass voice rang out. "What do you want here? Are you trying to have some fun?" Shikaku said something incoherent and hesitated for a second. That was enough time for Kurama to leap and swing its paw at the one tail. "Stop it," he yelled. "You wanted to kill those people?" The Nine-Tails growled. "Answer me. Stop talking to me like that." The sand demon continued to screech. "As if you were stronger than me." The fox chuckled maliciously and asked ingratiatingly, "Do you want to check this?" The raccoon began to squirm like a snake in a frying pan, trying not to make eye contact with his rival. Then he raised his nose and snapped. "I don't want to, but only because I don't care about you. Go where you were going." Kurama grinned again and said triumphantly, "Good. If you try to get close to the Valley of the End, you'll get it." One-Tailed snorted contemptuously and reluctantly turned back. "Next time I'll give you hell," he squeaked as he left. "If you want to fight, then fight, Shikaku. And save the empty threats for someone else." The sand demon didn't respond, only proudly raised his tail and hopped off into the distance. Kurama turned to Sakura and Kakashi and covered the distance between them in a few long leaps. The smirk vanished from his face, and his red eyes narrowed to slits. Finally, he stopped and began to carefully examine the man and the girl. "Thank you for helping us, Kurama." Kakashi bowed slightly, then looked up at the fox. But he apparently didn't appreciate the gratitude. You should hide your all-powerful eye. After that brat Sasuke and that bastard Madara, this purple ripple is annoying. And where's Naruto? The Ninetales asked menacingly. The man nodded and hid his Rinnegan behind his headband. Sakura looked down and answered the question in a muffled voice. He's gone. You must have felt it. The boy was killed by an Uchiha. The Ninetales' eyes narrowed even further, and he bared his teeth. You could say that, Kakashi replied. It looks like they dealt fatal blows to each other at the same time. Kurama growled and whispered through his teeth. Damn these Uchiha. They always cause nothing but trouble. There will be no more troubles. The sensei snapped. Sasuke was the last of his clan. There's no one left to revive him. I can't say I'm upset by this fact. Well, as for Naruto, Ninetales dropped to the ground, and the fox's grin disappeared. He suddenly looked up at the sky and muttered in a deep voice. I stopped sensing the boy's chakra yesterday, but I didn't want to think about his death. Well, miracles don't happen. Too bad, he was a good man. Sakura's heart ached with longing. The sight of the menacing demon grieving for his Jinchuriki wounded her already wounded soul. Who would have thought that the sunny boy could bind even the embodiment of hatred that once destroyed Konoha? Although, there was nothing surprising about this. For him, nothing was a problem. Gaining the respect of those who despised him, defeating pain, and ending the war. But surviving proved an impossible task. Sakura clenched her hand into a fist and pressed it to her chest. We have a plan. If you want, we can help you, the girl said, bowing her head. Kurama snorted. I don't give a damn about your help. You only see me here because you were nearby and heard Shikaku. And Naruto loved you both. That's all. Kakashi hastened to add. Sakura isn't just offering help. I'm going to use Edo Tensei and resurrect Naruto to dispel Tsukuyami. Then I can seal you. The fox looked closely at the man's face for a few seconds. So I won't be able to be reborn anymore? You can't. The teacher nodded. The demon continued. And that means that the next smart guy won't be able to put me into the 10 tails, and, therefore, no new resurrection of Kagaya and the eternal Tsukiyomi. That's right, Kurama chuckled. Well then, I'll think about your offer. He leaned his head toward Kakashi and smiled faintly. I'll give you permission to summon me when you resurrect Naruto. I'll ask him if he wants to spend eternity with his friend. Thanks again, Sakura muttered. The demon turned and slowly walked off into the distance without saying goodbye. A relieved sigh escaped the girl. He left. She stated an already obvious fact. For several minutes, they gazed at the horizon, from which the first rays of sunlight were beginning to break. The clouds gradually dispersed, and the sky began to explode with pinkish-purple hues. The teacher and student jumped to the ground. Only then did Sakura notice that she was shivering. Autumn had arrived, and she was still dressed in post-war rags. It was time to visit her home, if only to get kunai and shuriken and some proper clothes. And the thought of Konoha made the girl feel sick. After all, somewhere there in the village, her parents were hanging from the branches of the divine tree. There has been peace in eternal Tsukiyomi for 3 days now, she muttered, and we still haven't done anything. Kakashi put his hand on her shoulder and said cheerfully, I promise we'll free everyone by the day after tomorrow. A Rinnegan user doesn't need time to master the technique, so all I need to do is read the scroll. And then it's a piece of cake. Scroll? The encounter with the tailed beasts made Sakura stop thinking about the sacrifice needed for resurrection, even though it was the main focus of her thoughts before bed. When she gave in to her emotions and burst into tears yesterday, it would be unfair to say it was only because of Naruto and Sasuke. Yes, a new wave of pain washed over her, but at the same time, she felt childishly annoyed with herself. After all, she had made a choice, even if she hadn't yet had the courage to voice it out loud. As the teacher rightly noted, They had no moral right to decide for others. True and fair words. Therefore, Sakura had no intention of sacrificing innocent people. Commentary on Chapter 4. Eternity with a Friend. I would appreciate your opinions. Chapter 5. Lifeless House The last rays of the setting sun illuminated the Hokage rock and the numerous roofs of the houses, next to which towered massive, twisted, leafless branches with eerie cocoons hanging from them. The only two awake shinobi looked at each other and entered the main gates of Konoha. The streetlights were usually lit by this time, but now there was no light at all. Apparently, something had happened to the power lines during the 3 days of eternal Tsukuyomi, as there was no one to monitor it. Sakura paused for a moment and pursed her lips. Kakashi couldn't tell what she was thinking, but he guessed they were thinking alike. Konoha looked as if no one had set foot there in years. The only thing missing was the tumbleweeds scuttling past their feet. The village hadn't been rebuilt since Pain's attack, and that fact, coupled with the terrifying divine tree, left an indelible, oppressive impression. A painful, aching feeling of hopelessness filled the man's chest. He had no illusions about how he would see Hidden Leaf, but reality literally pulled the rug out from under him. Kakashi hadn't felt anything like this, not even during the Nine Tails and Pain's attack. Back then, comrades were dying around him, but hundreds of other brave shinobi fought alongside him, never losing heart. His enemy always faced him. He was used to looking at his opponent, crush him with techniques and cunning. Hate. Despise. And who should we despise now? The vile twisted branches? Madara? Kagaya? The latter were already dead, and the tree. It is merely a consequence of catastrophic events. An obvious thought flashed through Kakashi's mind. The embodiment of evil was no longer a human, or even a living being. The enemy was infinity itself. And even though he knew how to act, that didn't stop the hero of 2 great wars from feeling like an insignificant insect before this invincible force. They quickened their pace slightly, and Sakura surged ahead. She looked around with inconsolable sadness in her eyes. Her small fist was pressed to her chest, and the sight of his student in sorrow made Kakashi's heart ache. He was tired of seeing her in pain. He desperately wanted to comfort Sakura, but he knew that only time could conquer grief. Therefore, the only salvation was to quickly put his crazy plan into action, and choose the lucky one, who will become the victim. The silence was broken only by the sound of 2 pairs of feet stepping through the still dry puddles. Blown by the chill evening wind, they slowly made their way toward the Hokage's residence. Sunset had passed, and the last scarlet rays slowly faded from the stone faces of the village leaders, plunging the world into twilight blue. Suddenly the girl stopped and called out, "Kakashi-sensei, do you hear that?" The man stopped and strained his ears. A muffled whine could be heard somewhere nearby. "It's probably someone's dog. 3 days without an owner," he muttered. "We must help him," the student exclaimed. "Poor animal, so long without food and water." "Sakura, not now. Think about it. How many of these are there in Konoha? And in other villages? Nothing will happen to them in that time, and if we start helping everyone, we'll just waste precious hours. It would be far more effective to rescue their masters from Tsukuyomi's clutches as quickly as possible." The girl sighed heavily and muttered, "You're right. As always, you don't lose your cool." "She certainly thought I was a cynical person again," Kakashi thought. So be it. Better to be a scoundrel who fulfilled his duty than a kind-hearted idiot wasting precious minutes on trivialities. What are the lives of mere dogs compared to human ones? But this decision upset the only person close to him. Dogs? The thought burned like lightning through the man's insides. He quickly bit his thumb, smeared the blood on his palm, and, forming the seals of the tiger, snake, dragon, and dog, exclaimed, "Summoning technique." Then he crouched, touching the ground with his hand. An ornate seal instantly spread across the path, and 8 summoned Nikin emerged from thick clouds of smoke. Sakura raised her eyebrows in confusion and asked, "Have you decided to increase the number of Konoha dogs a little more?" "We're not your little dogs," the smallest dog barked. "Packin'," Kakashi addressed him, ignoring his student's question. "I have an unusual request for you." But the Nikin wasn't listening. The pug's perpetually indifferent eyes now scanned the surroundings with surprise. "What the hell happened here?" the pug muttered. Kakashi sighed heavily. "It's a long story, and I don't have time to tell it. Your task now will be to find all the pets locked in their houses, and provide them with food and water." "What?" The dog was indignant. "Where are their owners?" "That's exactly what we're doing." Nikin frowned. "You still remember that our abilities are focused on surveillance and combat, right?" "There's no one to fight." The man chuckled bitterly. "Help your brothers. That's all." "Okay," muttered Akino, a Nikin with a funny black pince on his nose. "Let's get to work." And the flock, dispersing through the streets, set out to carry out the task. "I told you," Sakura said quietly. "Always a cool head." "Thank you." The girl stepped closer and timidly hugged her teacher. This embrace was unlike the grief-filled intimacy they'd shared over the past 24 hours. But Kakashi quickly dismissed the strange thought and simply pulled Sakura to his chest. "Let's go," the man muttered. "It'll be completely dark soon. We need to get to the Hokage Tower." He turned around briefly, hearing the sound of breaking glass. One of the dogs had already reached its destination. The shinobi quickly headed toward the residence. Kakashi wasn't sure if the scroll containing the secrets of the impure world reincarnation was kept in the same place as the other forbidden techniques. But he was counting on it. If his fears were confirmed, the task would be greatly complicated. Surely, records of the Edo Tensei were in one of Orochimaru's hideouts, but searching would take many days. And during the time, it's quite possible that the personalities of those trapped in Tsukuyomi would be destroyed, and there would simply be no one left to save the world. Kakashi shook his head slightly, driving away the bad thoughts. Everything will work out. It couldn't be any other way. When there were only a few dozen meters left to the gates of the Hokage residence, Sakura stopped and said, "Kakashi-sensei, can I leave you for a while? It's not far from home. My clothes?" The girl hesitated for a moment, as if embarrassed by her request. "Are not warm at all. I'm of little use right now. I'll stock up on weapons, change, and find you here. Besides, I'm completely useless in a search." "Of course, go ahead." The man nodded. "I'll meet you here in half an hour." "Yes," Sakura answered cheerfully, turning around and, concentrating her chakra in her legs, quickly walked away in the direction of her home. Kakashi watched her go for a few seconds. His feigned optimism wasn't enough to fool him. They'd spent a whole day traveling to Konoha, barely speaking. After Sakura learned of their plan, something had changed within her. She withdrew even further, though it seemed like she couldn't go any further, and became lost in thought. And the man seemed to guess what she was worried about. But he dismissed the speculation again. He quickly headed toward the treasured room, where even Jonin were forbidden entry. Kakashi quickly crossed the protective barrier, opened the door, and found himself in a small, dark office lined with shelves of scrolls. The interior smelled of damp and old paper. A faint, dim light still filtered through the small window. With a heavy sigh, the man entered. Suddenly, Packet appeared out of the smoke nearby. "Kakashi, it's done. It was a bit tricky getting into the houses, but we managed. I created clones, so it was quick. A few cats tried to attack, but we, managed." "Thank you." The man smiled and, squatting down, stroked the pug on the scruff of the neck. "Do you need any more help?" the dog asked in a deep voice. "It looks like you're in a really bad way. I don't think you can help here." Kakashi chuckled sadly. "Okay." The pug nodded slightly. "Good luck." and with a loud bang the Ninkin disappeared. It turned out that the bulk of the shelves were occupied by archival documents, and all the forbidden techniques fit into one small section, so in just 10 minutes Kakashi found the coveted scroll. The man breathed a sigh of relief and went outside, where Sakura was already waiting for him in her usual mission uniform, a white hooded cloak, a red vest, a pink skirt, and black shorts. "Did you find it?" the girl asked with the same feigned cheerfulness. "Yes," Kakashi nodded, "but I haven't opened it yet. We have all of Konoha at our disposal right now. We need to sit down somewhere and study the technique. And, of course, have a snack. But you yourself said that the Rinnegan doesn't require time," Sakura objected. "True, but this will be my first time using it for real. Besides, we need some rest. We've been moving all day." "I don't understand you," the student smiled sadly. "One moment we are in a hurry, the next we are not. There was no time for the pets, but is there time to rest?" The pang of conscience was not long in coming. "We're in a hurry, but the world can only rely on us. Therefore, staying in shape is vital. Okay." Sakura folded her arms across her chest, sighing heavily. "I'll trust you." However, the girl's voice was tinged with distrust. Or something much worse? Contempt? Kakashi's heart was once again scorched by the vile feeling he felt yesterday. "You don't feel anything at all?" Sakura asked in his memories. At all? To the west, the sky still resisted the darkness and was tinged with violet blue. But above the shinobi's heads, the stars were already shining brightly on the black canvas. A full moon shone in the northeast, but its dim light was insufficient to discern the emotions on the student's face. So Kakashi didn't even try, looked down and, losing his patience, said coldly, "Sakura, that's enough." "What enough?" she asked, puzzled. "Consider me a bastard," the sensei snapped. A heavy silence fell. The wind blew through Sakura's pink hair and the hem of her cloak, breaking the silence with the rustle of canvas. "What makes you think I think so?" the girl muttered. "I'm not a fool." "I know." But instead of answering, Sakura changed the subject and made a suggestion that took the teacher by surprise. "Let's go to Shashu. Tsunade-sama always went there, so I know for sure they have sake." Kakashi's eyebrows rose. "Have you decided to get drunk?" "We won't be using technology today, will we? We need to wait until morning. So why not make the last evening more enjoyable?" Kakashi narrowed his eyes in disbelief. The last evening? But the student didn't answer. She overtook him and headed resolutely up the lifeless street toward the bar. Kakashi's suspicions were apparently not entirely unfounded. It was as if someone had doused him with cold water. "Do you really think I'd sacrifice you?" the man exclaimed angrily. "Do you think I'm capable of that?" Sakura stopped abruptly. In the moonlight, her shoulders tensed and her hands clenched into fists. "No. You'll try to dissuade me. But I've already made up my mind." Her voice trembled. "So I'm asking you to drink some sake with me. I've never tried it, and I want to for now." Kakashi clenched his teeth and felt a hot wave of a burning mixture of anger, disappointment, and resentment creep through his body. Commentary on Chapter 5. The Lifeless House. Thank you to everyone who reads, comments, and clicks. Waiting for more. I'm incredibly grateful for your interest in my work. Chapter 6. Executioners and victims Sakura couldn't understand where such blind determination came from. As they made their way to Konoha, a detailed plan formed itself. There was no real need to change into warmer clothes. After all, what was the point of worrying about the cold October nights when they had less than a day to live? But it was an excellent excuse to be home before the inevitable. All the girl wanted was to say goodbye. Sakura reveled in the thought that she was luckier than Naruto and Sasuke. After all, she had a slight head start. Unlike her friends, she knew when death would knock on her door. Farewell letters are a banal but effective way to say the last word. Of course, I'd like to give everyone a final hug, but thanks for that. The girl memorized every phrase she planned to write on the way to her home village. Important words for all those dear to her. For Mom and Dad. So they wouldn't grieve too much, but rather be proud. After all, their daughter is going to die a hero. For Ino. So that she doesn't relax and never forgets their rivalry. And also finds her happiness. To Fifth Sama, with the deepest gratitude. So that the Hokage knows how precious their bond was to Sakura. She wanted to write at least a few words for Hinata and Sai. But time was of the essence. So, with a trembling hand, she sealed 3 envelopes and left them by the front door of the empty, cold home. It cost her dearly to restrain herself from staining the letters with tears. But if she'd learned anything from Kakashi, it was to be a true shinobi. And true shinobi know neither fear nor pain. She didn't want to stay in her parents' house any longer than necessary. The gloomy view outside the window made her heart clench with melancholy. But this depressing landscape motivated her. After all, the sooner they ended everything, the sooner Konoha would return to life. She closed her eyes, remembering her parents' faces, and ran to the meeting place with the sensei. She absolutely mustn't remember her mom and dad dangling in capsules on a vile branch. They were alive. They were healthy. She just wasn't destined to see it. "Sakura, stop calling me a bastard!" The teacher's piercing words knocked her off balance. The girl dug her nails into her palms with all her might, trying to stifle the wave of tears with the physical pain. And yet, Sakura had merely offered her some sake. Why, then, did the sensei's words hurt so much? Because it was her own fault. Her behavior had led to its inevitable outcome. And, even though Sakura didn't want to admit it, it was irritating. She signed her own death warrant. Can't she be a little more tolerant? But that didn't matter anymore. She wanted to say goodbye to the teacher, too. But to make it less bitter, after all, writing letters is easier than looking into his eyes. She came up with the brilliant idea of enlivening her last evening with a little intoxication. Sakura took a few deep breaths and headed back toward the bar. She didn't want to get into a fight. "Really?" the inner voice asked sarcastically. "Little liar. You may deceive yourself, but you won't fool Kakashi. You're afraid of death, and behind a mask of pride you hide sadness." "Shut up!" the girl muttered quietly so that the teacher wouldn't hear. She pulled her hood up, as if protecting herself from the world. No tears. Not now. Suddenly, breaking the heavy silence, the teacher jumped up to her, tugged her sleeve, and spun her around. He stared for a few seconds into the girl's eyes, which widened in surprise. The teacher's gaze chilled her insides. The black eye, uncovered by the bandage, stared at her as if she were her worst enemy. As if Sakura were responsible for the eternal Tsukuyomi. As if the sensei was about to pierce her with Chidori. "Are you out of your mind?" the sensei roared, shaking his student hard by the shoulders. Sakura stared at the man blankly, unsure how to respond. Sweat beaded on her palms. Kakashi cursed, released her, and turned away. A strange feeling mingled with the cold in her stomach. Conscience? Guilt? Regret? "You? I won't allow it!" The teacher's voice faltered. Kakashi's breathing became ragged and uneven. It felt like he'd run a couple of kilometers without stopping. The man clutched his chest abruptly and leaned forward. "What's wrong with you?" Sakura cried out in fear, rushing towards the teacher. A moment of confusion quickly gave way to a trained medic's instincts. She grabbed his elbow, concentrated chakra in her palm, ready to begin the healing process, and peered into his face. And then Sakura's heart sank into her stomach, and a shuddering gasp escaped her lungs. Kakashi jerked his hand away and broke free from his student's embrace. The green glow vanished from the girl's fingers. She couldn't believe what she saw, but she was ready to swear she hadn't imagined it. In the dim moonlight, She could clearly see a tear trickle from a closed eye onto the black mask. The kunoichi's eyebrows shot up. She pressed her palms to her lips and felt all traces of her fortitude vanish. She wanted to be brave so badly. By God, she really wanted to. But when the most powerful and unshakable person shows weakness, it becomes truly scary. Sakura didn't know what to say, and that made it even worse. Kakashi had always been there. He'd always supported her. And now, when it was time to reciprocate, she couldn't utter a word. She couldn't even move. After just a few moments, the man straightened up and muttered, "Sorry. I gave in to a moment of weakness." Another couple of heavy, silent seconds. "Let's go," said the teacher, turning towards the road. "Let's drink some sake." It was only a 5-minute walk from the Hokage's residence to Shushui, but to Sakura, it felt like an eternity. She walked behind her sensei, occasionally glancing up at his back, and each time, she felt a piercing pain in her heart. What had happened? Why had her teacher's emotion affected her so? But it would be great if it all ended with just that damn tear. An invisible chasm formed between them, one they could feel on their skin. "What are you doing, Sakura?" The inner voice awoke again. "You just buried your loved ones. You're left alone in the world. Why the conflict?" But the kunoichi had no idea how to fix the situation. She also had no idea why her plan now seemed so pathetic. Why did she suddenly feel ashamed of it? The bar, like all the other shops and establishments on what was once Konoha's busiest street, looked depressing. At this time of day, life was just beginning to blossom here. Now, there was nothing but darkness and cold emptiness. The door, of course, was unlocked. Kakashi gave it a gentle push. Several cats immediately jumped out of the open window. They probably found something to eat in the absence of people. The teacher walked inside without even looking back at his student. "Kakashi-sensei, I brought some candles from home," Sakura muttered. But he didn't seem to hear her. So the girl silently followed, pulled a small candle from her coat's inner pocket, lit it, and approached the bar. A faint, intoxicating aroma lingered inside, a reminder that just a couple of days ago, it had been bustling with activity. Glasses and empty plates sat on the tables. They must have held scraps, but the stray cats had gotten rid of them. Kakashi walked behind the bar in a familiar manner and began looking at the bottles. "Do you prefer light or aged?" he asked coldly, slamming 2 large containers onto the bar. "I don't care," the student answered almost in a whisper. "Then let's start with the easy part." The man took 2 small cups from the shelf and poured the drink into them. Sakura bit her lip. That annoying silence again. "Drink. You wanted it," Kakashi said in an icy voice, pushing the cup closer to his student. He sat down across from her at the bar, lowered his mask, and downed his drink. This time, Sakura didn't look away. She peered desperately, trying to detect any trace of anything other than indifference on his face. But all she saw was a flickering shadow cast by the candlelight and the familiar coldness. Not a trace of her nervous breakdown remained. The girl grabbed the cup and downed the sake in one gulp, and immediately regretted it. The drink burned her esophagus and her nose stung. Sakura grimaced. "The first time you need to take smaller sips," Kakashi said. The girl's fists clenched against her will. She asked, "Pour me some more, sensei." The man didn't even bat an eyelid and refilled the cups. They emptied their cups simultaneously. This time, it was easier to drink. Sakura hadn't had a chance to eat all day, so she felt the warmth from her stomach quickly spreading throughout her body. The kunoichi suddenly felt the courage she'd lost since the skirmish at the Hokage's residence. There was no time to put it off, so she took a deep breath and spoke. "Kakashi-sensei, we need to discuss this. Right now. There won't be any other time," the man asked mockingly. "And what will this conversation be about? About your death? Does this make you laugh?" Sakura asked quietly. "Does it look like I'm having fun?" the teacher replied. The girl faltered again, looking down. She began to twirl her cup in her hands, unsure what to say next. The silence was broken by an icy voice that made her heart clench like a pea. It's surprisingly easy to say goodbye when you're only thinking about yourself, isn't it? She opened her mouth, intending to object, but all the words that came to mind stuck in her throat. It's not easy at all, Sakura squeezed out, feeling the blood rush to her cheeks. What are you saying? Kakashi raised an eyebrow skeptically and propped his chin on his hand. Have you thought about your parents? They will understand and be proud. Their daughter will die a hero and put an end to the eternal Tsukuyomi. The man chuckled coldly. And this fact is supposed to heal their pain? And what about the unimaginable loss to the village? Tsunade-sama is certainly a brilliant medic, but she shortened her lifespan too much in the war, expending so much chakra. Fifth is no longer a girl. Who will protect the village and heal the shinobi after her? We have plenty of wonderful doctors, Sakura retorted. Okay. Kakashi nodded and filled the cups with drink again. What about me? The girl glanced at him briefly and then turned away again, unable to resist the weight of his heavy gaze. He still hadn't put on his mask, and the piercingly stern expression on his face was nauseating. What about you? The kunoichi repeated his question. Kakashi handed her the glass and continued. Exactly, Sakura. You haven't thought about what it would be like for me to lose the last person I loved, have you? He hesitated for a moment. The girl held her breath. Father, Sensei, Obito, Rin, Naruto, Sasuke. Do you think this is a short list? No, but I won't allow another name to be added there, Kakashi interrupted. No way. A heavy sigh escaped her lungs. Sakura felt uneasy, as if she had no right to see her teacher's twisted soul. Mustering her willpower, she slammed her palm onto the wooden surface and said angrily, And who do you think it should be? Some unfortunate shinobi who miraculously survived the war? Or maybe one of those poor wretches hanging from that damn tree? You yourself said we have no right to decide for others. So why sacrifice someone without even giving them a vote? Kakashi looked at her intently. Then he drained his cup, wiped his lips with his sleeve, and said, And again, you consider me a scoundrel. Nothing of the sort, Sakura exclaimed even more emotionally, jumping up from her chair. The man chuckled. Well, yes. The girl almost screamed. I don't want you to worry about me. I've already made up my mind and accepted the need for sacrifice. I don't need to convince you otherwise. I want to go to Sasuke and Naruto, to complete my ninja path with dignity and do something worthwhile. Victim, Kakashi repeated, as if savoring the word. And that means I'm supposed to be the executioner? It seems so, Sakura answered more quietly. And, in your opinion, living life is not as worthy as dying a painful death? Sakura cursed and pinched the bridge of her nose with her fingers. I told you that I won't let innocent people die. They won't have to, Kakashi said calmly. He then lifted the headband and looked at Sakura with the Rinnegan. Tomorrow morning, you will take this eye, learn the technique, and resurrect Naruto. Together, you will dispel Tsukuyomi. And then, after grieving for a moment over our deaths, you will live the happiest of lives. And just try to disobey orders. The man closed his eyes and smiled warmly. After all, I'm still, technically, the captain of Team 7. And you're still a part of it. So get used to being an executioner. It's not so scary. An invisible vice squeezed Sakura's chest. No way, she whispered, feeling tears treacherously welling up in her eyes. This will never happen. Commentary on Chapter 6. Executioners and Victims. This chapter was hard to write, because we're on the verge of a denouement. I'm terrified to think what will happen to my emotional state next. Enjoy reading. And thank you again for your feedback. I still can't believe there are so many of you Red Heart. Chapter 7. Let's say goodbye tomorrow equals 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 equals. Kakashi tried desperately to maintain a calm demeanor, and it seemed he overdid it. Sakura even thought he was mocking her, but it was better than showing weakness again. The man felt something strange. More than anything, he wanted to do two things: rip the Rinnegan from his eye socket and throw it into the candle flame to cast off the oppressive weight of responsibility, and then embrace Sakura. Even though he'd made his final decision, it was hard to believe he was dead. Kakashi had always been prepared for death. After his death, Rin even sought it out, desperately throwing himself at enemies on every A and BU mission. But this was different. What he was planning seemed like suicide. The thought made it even worse. After all, his father was always intruding into his memories. The tiny candlelight made it seem as if stars were flickering and fading in Sakura's eyes. She was about to give in and stop pretending to be an indestructible rock. So be it. Humility never comes without sorrow. An ordinary girl who had been through too much. The man understood and respected her resilience, but he couldn't give in. His decision to go to the chopping block himself was frankly selfish. After all, for him, it would be over quickly, and Sakura would have to live with it. But oddly enough, this fact was his final ironclad argument if he had to argue with his student again. The girl meant far more to Kakashi than he did to her, and so Sakura would certainly survive. The man tried not to think that he was condemning her to the same torment he'd endured when he pierced Rin with the Raikiri. He hadn't known how things would turn out, and now all his cards were on the table. 2 tears fell from Sakura's eyes onto the bar counter. Kakashi's heart immediately responded, clenching in pain. Love? A wild thought flashed through my mind. He definitely loved her, there's no doubt about it, but not at all in the way that people usually describe this feeling. His emotions were far more complex and profound. He wasn't drawn to Sakura. She was still too young after all. But isn't it love when all you want is to wipe the tears from her face? Isn't it love when you desperately long to see her finally happy? Who cares what you call this heartbreaking range of emotions? It doesn't matter at all. You can't do this! The girl finally broke the silence. I can and I will, Kakashi answered. But enough. This is my order, so no buts. This conversation is over. Sakura bit her lip and then, swallowing the lump in her throat, said, Why should I accept your point of view? After all, our arguments are identical. You haven't thought about me, have you? How will I live with this burden? Oh, girl, I already know all your arguments. There will be no winners in this game, but I'm still ahead. Kakashi glanced quickly at the girl's palms, then looked out the window and asked thoughtfully, Tell me, Sakura, why did you go home? She frowned for a second, then looked down, embarrassed. Change your clothes, can't you see? The man chuckled, quickly touched Sakura's palm with his index finger and nodded. It's visible. And the small ink stain on her right hand is also clearly visible. Who are you writing farewell letters to? In the silence that followed, he clearly heard a convulsive sigh escape the student's lips. You don't have to answer. It's not important. What matters is that you have someone to say goodbye to. A mixture of despair and fear joined the pained grimace on Sakura's face. And with a soft sob, she made one last attempt to tip the scales in this foolish argument. I can't handle the Rinnegan. My chakra isn't strong enough. What if it doesn't work? What if, because of my mistake, the world remains in the eternal Tsukuyomi? And I... She paused and finished through clenched teeth. Will I be all alone in such a terrible world? With each phrase like this, it became increasingly difficult to keep my cool. I would gladly hold your hand so that you don't have to carry this burden yourself, but stop underestimating yourself. You're not that timid 13-year-old anymore. Accept this as your duty, as another mission. There will be no other way. And there were no more objections to this argument. Kakashi poured the rest of the sake into cups and handed it to his student. I believe in you, Sakura. I don't think for a second that you can't handle this, and that there's anything positive to be found in our situation. I'm glad you were there. It would be impossible to find a more worthy person for our mission." This was the last straw for the young kunoichi. She didn't touch her cup and, pursing her lips, ran out into the street. Kakashi sighed heavily and finished his drink. He was proud of himself. If his emotions did spill out, things would be much more difficult for Sakura. As it was, let her think her teacher was going to die with a light heart. Since his words didn't just hit her head, his determination completely destroyed Sakura. There was no escape. The last word was his. She will need to kill Kakashi. It sounded like someone's crazy joke. And indeed, deciding on her own death was far easier than accepting her teacher's sacrifice. Sakura felt hot despite the cold wind. She ran to a tree, leaned on her elbow, and bent over as if in sharp pain. Although why as if? Her insides ached as if 1,000 shurikens had been stabbed into her. First Sasuke and Naruto. Now Kakashi. How is she supposed to survive this? Choking with bitter feelings, Sakura fell to her knees and squeezed her eyes shut. She tried to remember herself being happy. Nothing worked. Just a week ago, life had gone on as usual. But it felt like it wasn't her life anymore. Footsteps were heard behind her. A sharp sense of guilt seared Sakura's heart. And now, once again, she needed to be reassured. A damned vicious circle of helplessness. Instead of offering her support to the teacher who was about to abandon her, she had shown weakness again. "Forgive me, Kakashi-sensei," Sakura blurted out. "Please forgive me." The teacher came over and squatted down opposite him. Then, slightly surprised, he asked, "And what are you apologizing for again?" "For weakness," the girl muttered. "I hate myself. You're the one who needs consolation." Barely breathing out the wave of sadness that had washed over him, he said, "Come on, I'm fine." Sakura gritted her teeth, trying to hold back the giant wave of pain and not let it spill out. But it was beyond her strength. Despite the circumstances, Kakashi still kept his composure. He even skillfully lied about being fine. Well, how bad was the situation if he called it order? Cool reasoning suggested the right conclusions. If Sakura was feeling bad again, almost as bad as she had after Sasuke and Naruto's deaths, that meant the process of reconciliation had begun. An excellent sign. There would be no need to argue again. But his heart wasn't made of iron. And Kakashi gave in. Once again, for the umpteenth time, he reached for the girl and pressed her breasts against his, experiencing a painful sense of relief. Sakura, as always, didn't resist. This time, she grabbed Kakashi's shoulders as if he was about to fall into an abyss or sink to the bottom. In essence, that is how it was. The man was already prepared to console his hysterical student. He placed his hand on the top of her head and gently squeezed her pink hair. But contrary to expectations, Sakura muttered without a trace of tears in her voice. "Well, I wanted to say goodbye to you. That's why I invited you to drink sake. Only now my prepared words don't work." "It's too early. Let's say goodbye tomorrow," Kakashi whispered. Sakura nodded and rested her head on the teacher's shoulder, burying her nose in the collar of his vest. She still hadn't cried. Was she holding back? Or were there no tears left in her poor, exhausted heart? The man closed his eyes and bowed his head, touching his temple to the girl's forehead. And suddenly it dawned on him. A kindred heart. Those were the words he would use to describe her. The storm of emotions finally coalescing into something almost tangible made his soul feel lighter. "You need to get some sleep before tomorrow," Kakashi said, still hugging her. "I'll walk you home. You'll finally get some sleep in your own bed." "I'm never going home," Sakura said under her breath. "We can spend the night here," Kakashi chuckled. "So, we have any dwelling in Konoha at our disposal, and we'll sleep on the grass." But his student didn't find it funny. "We will. I don't have the strength to go anywhere. Don't leave me," Tomorrow. Sakura stopped mid-sentence. Okay, Kakashi said quietly, gently running his hand through the girl's soft hair. I don't want to spend my last hours alone either. For the second night in a row, the hugs had a soporific effect on Sakura. The sake she drunk had taken its toll too. She fell asleep in just 30 minutes. Kakashi carefully, trying not to disturb the fragile sleep, pulled himself out of her embrace. Then he removed his vest and placed it under her head. For a few seconds, he gazed into her face, listening to his feelings and becoming even more convinced that he had come up with the right definition. A soulmate. His soulmate. He couldn't get a decent night's sleep. Thoughts of the day ahead couldn't leave his mind for a second. Moreover, the night's lodging turned out to be much less comfortable than the previous night. So until morning, Kakashi's only activity was sitting under a tree, gazing alternately at the stars and at the sleeping Sakura. A couple of times the thought crossed my mind that it would be nice to run home for. Come, paradise! And that was even funny. Jiraiya-sama, I hope you wrote something new up there in the sky. I'll be joining you soon. Don't let me down. As the first rays of light lit the eastern sky, Kakashi lightly stroked his student's forehead. She opened her eyes, unsure for a moment where she was. It's time, the teacher muttered and felt how much he wanted to stay alive. The girl didn't answer. She meekly stood up, glanced quickly at the rising sun, and turned to Kakashi. Sakura looked paler than usual. And then she said something that completely knocked the wind out from under her. Is it time to say goodbye? After all, tomorrow has already come. Commentary on Chapter 7, Saying Goodbye Tomorrow. Once again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the overwhelming response. Your support really motivates me to write faster. And yes, sorry for so much glass. When I started writing, I assumed it would be emotionally challenging, but I didn't think it would be this much. And everything will be resolved in the next chapter, so keep your fingers crossed and stock up on valerian. Chapter 8. Types of silence Yes, Sakura. It's time to say goodbye, Kakashi said quietly, after a short pause. The girl nervously ran her hand through her disheveled hair and pinched the bridge of her nose. She was terrified. She didn't want to lose her eye and experience physical pain. She was terrified of what would come next. Let's get this over with quickly, the teacher suggested quietly and calmly, kneeling. We're already in the 4th day of the eternal Tsukuyomi. Many of those trapped there were running low on chakra. We need to hurry, otherwise the consequences will be catastrophic. And casting a quick upward glance at his student, he removed the bandana and clutched it tightly in his hand. Sakura didn't turn around for a few moments. A veritable storm raged within her, but she no longer had the strength to cry or beg. She suddenly realized she respected her sensei too much to continue to contradict him. But the thought of choosing a random person as a victim no longer seemed so terrifying and immoral, and that made her feel ashamed. But how can I live after doing something like this? Kakashi at least intended to leave of his own free will. Sakura turned and sat down opposite the teacher, who was still clutching the metal plate with the Konoha symbol engraved on it in his palm with all his might. May I take it? The girl nodded at the bandana. I'll need it now. Kakashi smiled faintly and muttered. The main thing is, don't attach too much importance to this piece of fabric. And don't dare remember today every time you put it on. Sakura didn't answer and silently reached for the forehead protector, but as soon as she touched her teacher's cool skin, she couldn't pull her hand away. The man looked up. The kunoichi stared blankly at the bandana. After a few seconds of hesitation, Kakashi placed his other hand on top and squeezed his fingers tightly. Sakura flinched slightly at the new touch. I don't want you to leave, she whispered, still holding her hand. Kakashi was silent, and the girl suddenly understood. Why be shy if they had so little time left? With a shaky sigh, She sat up and reached for the teacher's cheek. He instinctively pulled away. The girl lowered her palms and muttered, "I just want to remember your face. If you allow me." A short, nervous laugh escaped his chest. He took her hand and placed it on his cheek. Sakura felt the touch of the fabric for a few seconds, then carefully lowered it, revealing his handsome, masculine face. Hesitating for just a moment, she gently touched his stiff stubble with her fingers. At any other time, he would never have allowed himself such liberties. After all, it could very well have harmed Sakura. There's a 12-year age difference. Besides, he's her teacher. But that didn't matter now. No one would ever know about their brief farewell in the heart of deserted Konoha. Not a single living soul would ever know the utter bitterness that raged in Kakashi's heart as that small hand warmed his cheek. Even if he wanted to, he simply couldn't pull away now. And then a crazy idea came to mind, one the man would never have realized in his previous life. It was akin to an obsession, or a last wish. He quickly rose, reached for Sakura, and kissed her briefly, pulling away immediately, not giving her a chance to recover. She gasped, pressed her hand to her lips, and blushed deeply. "Sorry," Kakashi muttered. It couldn't even be called a kiss. Just a simple touch. He felt ashamed of this action. This stupid kiss would complicate everything for the girl. Now she would think about it, remember. Idiot, nothing to say. "I'm sorry," Kakashi repeated. It was an accident. Sakura stared at her teacher, still terrified, unable to tear her hand away from her lips. She didn't know what to feel. Fear? Horror? Shame? Regret? But against this storm of emotions, there was a simple desire, to prolong the feeling of their sudden closeness. And, realizing there would be no other chance, Sakura decided to give in to the impulse. She shook her head, as if trying to come to her senses, placed her hand on her teacher's cheek again, and reached for his face. She could have sworn she could hear Kakashi's heart beating rapidly. He clearly hadn't expected this, but he leaned forward and touched her lips again. This time the kiss was real, and it made Sakura's insides twist. The man touched the back of her head, holding her even tighter. For a brief moment, she forgot that it would all be over very soon. All possible words of farewell flew from her head. And who needed them now? When Kakashi broke the kiss, silence fell. He pressed his forehead to the bridge of Sakura's nose and ran the back of his hand over her sharp cheekbone. How many different kinds of silence had there been between them over these long days? Awkward, heavy, oppressive. And now it was that very silence that I wanted to prolong forever. The girl suddenly felt a lump of regret rise in her throat. And she muttered, "I don't care about the world. I don't care about the eternal Tsukuyumi. Stay with me." He wanted nothing more than to agree. But his duty as a shinobi prevented him from giving in to his feelings. So, gritting his teeth, the man stroked her pink hair one last time and pulled away. "You know, this is impossible," he whispered and turned his gaze to the east. The sun had finally risen, bathing Konoha in its full light. Sakura's heart sank. Could it really end like this? Why? Was there nothing that could be done? "Rinnegan," Kakashi reminded, pointing his finger at his left eye. The girl paled and looked down, realizing the goodbyes were over. Naruto's image suddenly flashed through her mind. Would he have allowed someone close to him to die willingly? Never. He would have scratched his head awkwardly, smiled broadly, and promised to cope, no matter how hard it was. "Don't give up, Sakura. There's always a way out," flashed through Naruto's mind. The kiss still burned on the kunoichi's lips. She felt a little ashamed, having completely forgotten about Sasuke. No, of course, his death still broke her young heart. But this kiss, like a small island of happiness in the middle of an ocean of sorrow. Sakura suddenly realized she wanted nothing more than to experience these emotions just once more. She glanced quickly at her teacher. Kakashi pulled the scroll containing the technique from his pocket and studied it, frowning slightly. A strange, tugging feeling appeared inside her, difficult to describe, So profound. Sakura lowered her head and asked through clenched teeth, "Are you ready?" "Yes," Kakashi nodded. "Let's begin." As always in such moments, fear vanished, leaving behind a cold determination. The girl concentrated chakra in her palm and, gathering the last of her willpower, gouged out her left eye. A sharp pain pierced her head all the way to the back of her neck. Hot, thick blood trickled down her cheek. Sakura quickly refocused and pressed her glowing green palm to the empty socket. Kakashi leaned toward Sakura and gazed worriedly at her face. That strange feeling in her stomach returned. She mentally scolded herself and reached for her Rinnegan with her right hand. His eyes followed her steadily. Sakura was willing to bet there was something new in that usually indifferent gaze. Some emotion that radiated through the air and was practically palpable on her skin. This tension drowned out all physical suffering. The girl ran her fingers from her temple to the eyelid above her teacher's left eye. The frantic pounding of her heart and the rush of adrenaline dulled the sharp pain. "Come on," the man said quietly. "Let's finish this quickly." Sakura took a deep breath, concentrated chakra in her hand, and pulled out her Rinnegan. The teacher's face contorted, and he closed his eyes, instinctively covering his empty eye socket with his palm. "Let me fly a little," the girl muttered. But Kakashi put his hand forward, making a stopping gesture, and objected. "I'll be patient. Finish with the eye." "Okay," Sakura replied and focused on her feelings. They say the Rinnegan's power can drive a weak-willed person mad. Sakura didn't know how strong her will was, but she wasn't afraid at all. She gritted her teeth and, filling her palm with healing chakra, inserted the powerful eye into the socket. The back of her head, forehead, and temples were seared with pain the likes of which the girl had never experienced. She closed her eyes and couldn't help but scream. "Fight!" Kakashi exclaimed, squeezing her shoulder tightly. "You have to do this!" But the pain didn't subside. The girl felt like her head was about to explode. "Damn it!" Sakura cursed, and with incredible effort opened her eyelids. Tears mixed with blood and streamed down my palms. My temples and eye socket still throbbed, but the pain had subsided, and the physical suffering was replaced by an incredible surge of strength. She looked at Kakashi and saw a stream of blue chakra. The teacher smiled warmly and praised her. "Well done." Then he raised himself and tied the bandana around the girl's head, just as he always did for himself, covering her left eye. The girl's heart did a somersault at the newfound closeness. But Kakashi became serious again and spoke. "Edo Tensei is a complex technique. However, for a Rinnegan user, it's just another easy jutsu. So just read it." The man handed the student a sheet of information and continued. "This is, essentially, a normal summoning. Only a very unnatural one." Kakashi pulled out another scroll and a small vial of Naruto's hair from his pocket. "That's it. We have the conditions for performing resurrection, the DNA of the person being summoned." He raised the vessel a little higher, then pointed his thumb at himself. "And a container for it." The girl lifted the bandana covering her new eye and read the short text. A simple summoning technique indeed. A gasp escaped Sakura's lips. She glanced around quickly, her gaze catching on the eerie cocoons fluttering in the wind. And then a burning thought washed over her. Kakashi silently studied his student's face. Fortunately, Sakura looked better than expected. She had truly resigned herself to the inevitable, though she seemed a little confused. This was reassuring. Still, he didn't want to leave after seeing her in such unbearable pain. He tried not to think about how his student would feel afterwards, and simply believed in the girl's strength of spirit. "Kakashi-sensei," the kunoichi said, "let me clear my head a little. This technique, it's not difficult, but it'll be very difficult mentally. I need to get myself together. Of course, but not for long. We've already delayed the mission too long." The girl nodded and stood up, walking unsteadily down the street. She walked only a few dozen meters before stopping at a branch of the divine tree. He's probably thinking about how to quickly get rid of this nightmare. Yes, the death of one shinobi is nothing compared to restoring peace. But suddenly Sakura turned around. There was a wild, crazy determination in her eyes that made the man's insides turn cold with foreboding. "Forgive me, Kakashi-sensei," the girl exclaimed. Then, with the agility of a cat, she leaped closer to the branch, snatched up a kunai, and, before her teacher could grasp her intentions, she yanked open the scroll and threw the vial of hair into the center of the seal. The sound of breaking glass was heard. Another leap, and with a sharp movement, Sakura severed the branch containing the cocoon. And before the tree could regenerate its hideous, unnatural flesh, the girl formed the snake seal and exclaimed, "Edo Tensei!" "No!" Kakashi screamed at the top of his lungs, rushing towards his student. But it was too late. Blacking patterns began to spread across the ground. Something resembling shredded sheets of paper began to stick to the cocoon. Kakashi's heart sank, and he froze a few meters away from Sakura. She turned a guilty gaze on the man and pursed her lips. Tears welled up in her eyes. A sticky, unpleasant feeling of disappointment began to spread through the body of the would-be victim. His student had just transgressed moral principles and killed an innocent person. Commentary on Chapter 8. Varieties of Silence. I don't even know what to say. I hope you survived the stress and didn't have a heart attack. And one more small question. I feel like the work, contrary to my original intention, has turned into a het rather than a gin. I don't know yet whether to change its direction. And, as always, thank you for your comments on the previous chapters. Your support is truly heartwarming. Chapter 9. Interrupting Infinity . Sakura still didn't fully understand what she'd done, but she felt such pain, as if her soul had been slashed with a knife. She'd succumbed to a momentary madness, and not only gone against her teacher's wishes, but also gone against her own convictions. Excuses were on the tip of my tongue. Something stupid like, "I did it for you," or "I can't stand being your executioner." But such arguments were utter childishness, and reality mercilessly proved it. The girl sacrificed a man she didn't even know, purely for the sake of her own egoism. Sakura wanted to justify herself at least by the fact that Sensei remained alive, which meant the end justified the means. But he looked at her with a gaze you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. His black eye held a painful mixture of contempt, disappointment, and disgust, which meant none of the arguments that came to mind excused her. "What have you done?" Kakashi asked hoarsely. The brief moment of silence before the technique's completion felt like an eternity to Sakura. The heaviness grew and intensified. She had no clear explanation for her actions, so she simply turned her gaze to the cocoon. The resurrection was almost complete. Something that resembled both ash and paper began to crumble from the bandaged body, and the horrific, entwined cloth fell to the ground. Sakura's heart sank. This was something she hadn't truly prepared for. It was one thing to bury a friend, quite another to see them resurrected. It was the same Naruto, only pale as the first snow, and covered in terrible cracks, as if his skin were made of porcelain. For several minutes, black eyeballs with blue irises stared unseeingly somewhere through Sakura. "Naruto!" the kunoichi called quietly, trying to calm her frantic heartbeat. "Can you hear me?" The guy twitched slightly, and then slowly turned his gaze to his girlfriend's face. Kakashi came closer and asked, "Naruto, do you recognize us?" Silence. The girl spoke, trying not to look at the teacher. "Maybe the technology didn't work as it should?" "That's impossible." Kakashi glanced sideways at Sakura and added coldly, "I saw you did everything right." The kunoichi bit her lip as guilt washed over her again. But she'd think about shame later. Right now, she had far more important matters. Finally, the boy spoke up. "Sakura-chan? Kakashi-sensei?" Naruto asked hoarsely, staring stupidly at his cracked palms. She couldn't contain her emotions any longer. Sakura sobbed, unable to believe that her dear friend, whom she had buried with her own hands a couple of days ago, was now standing before her. Am I alive? Am I seeing things? Naruto raised his head and looked questioningly at the teacher. Technically, yes, he answered affirmatively. We really need your help. Finally, the boy began to understand. He carefully felt his face, his hair, and then touched his chest with his palm, listening to himself. His blue eyes widened. It doesn't work, Uzumaki muttered in disappointment. Kakashi walked up to his student, placed his hand on his shoulder, and spoke quickly. Naruto, you must help us dispel the eternal Tsukuyomi. It turns out the tail beast chakra within you is our last chance. Please pull yourself together. Sakura longed to be as cool-headed as her teacher, but it was beyond her powers. So, casting aside all prejudices, she did what she had desperately wanted to do since the moment of her resurrection. She threw herself into her friend's arms. He awkwardly hugged her and began to look around. How much time has passed? 4 days, Sakura answered, pulling away a little. Her friend's skin was icy cold. It sent shivers down her spine, and a slight tremor began to run through her hands. The girl bit her lip to keep from bursting into tears right then and there. So, you used the same technique that caused Madara and the others to appear. Naruto muttered, scratching his chin. We had to. Kakashi nodded. Naruto. Sakura sobbed, unable to resist her sadness. I'm so glad to see you. And she rushed towards her friend again, burying her nose in his shoulder. This time he hugged her tighter. Sakura-chan, I knew you were crazy about me, his partner exclaimed with a grin. The girl pulled back and couldn't help but smile. Fool, she muttered, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Naruto's gaze became sadder. Don't be sad, Sakura-chan. I'll definitely help you and save the world. Well, I'll actually be able to keep my promise. He chuckled and scratched the back of his head. Naruto Uzumaki never goes back on his word, Dadabeo. Even in death. It was painful, unbearable, and wrong. By all rights, the dead should remain dead. And it seemed the girl simply wouldn't have the mental strength to endure it a second time, even though she had several days to prepare and accept the inevitable. Still biting her lip, Sakura lowered her eyes and grimaced as emotions overwhelmed her. Suddenly a hand, the cold of which could be felt even through the fabric of the cloak, covered the girl's shoulder. Don't be so sad. Dying, as it turns out, isn't so bad, you know. And by the way, can those who are resurrected become Hokage? Naruto placed his hands on his hips and looked at the rock with the village leaders' faces, laughing sadly. For a moment, Sakura thought he'd never died. She tried to smile back. Kakashi interrupted them and began to bring the guy up to speed. We need you and Sakura to form a seal of reconciliation. And we also met Kurama. It seems the fox wants to be sealed within you forever. Naruto suddenly became serious. He placed his hand on his stomach, where the seal that held the demon had once been, and asked, Are you sure, Kakashi-sensei? Absolutely. The teacher nodded. Kurama no longer wishes to be summoned by anyone, much less participate in a potential repeat of the Ten-Tail story. Sakura glanced quickly at the man, marveling at his resilience. What was he feeling now? Was he in pain? The mask of emotionlessness could no longer deceive her. Not after the emotions she witnessed over the past 24 hours. Can you summon Kurama? Kakashi asked Naruto. I thought Fox gave you permission to summon. The Kunoichi muttered. He allowed it, but now I don't have the Rinnegan. And he had no such agreement with you. By the way, why does Sakura have an eye? Uzumaki raised an eyebrow in confusion. It's a long story that we don't have time for. The teacher snapped. Well, as always, Naruto said discontentedly, adding, There's never time for the most interesting things. Fine, in that case, I'll enter Sage mode and try to detect the Kyuubi's chakra by concentrating natural energy. The girl exhaled and listened to her sensations. It seemed her powers were intact. This meant that the Edo Tensei had practically no effect on her chakra. But there was no certainty that the impure world reincarnation would last long. While Naruto was sitting in the lotus position and using the inner concentration seal to enter hermit mode, she walked a few meters away and turned away. It all happened so quickly that she had no time to catch her breath. Besides, what was happening seemed surreal. Kakashi approached her and asked in a barely audible voice, "So why did you disobey me, Sakura?" The girl pursed her lips and turned her head further away. "Let's talk about this later." "What if your mother was there? Or your father?" The teacher persisted. A chill instantly appeared inside her, as if a frost had formed on her heart. She hadn't thought about her parents at all. "Enough, Kakashi-sensei," Sakura said quietly. "It's done. There's no turning back." And suddenly they heard a growing rumble. The student and teacher turned sharply. Naruto's eyes widened as well. They didn't have to summon Kurama. The demon had found them himself. The fox quickly approached with graceful leaps, trying not to touch the houses and branches of the divine tree with his tail. "Kurama!" Naruto exclaimed joyfully and waved his hand in greeting. But the Ninetales' gaze made it clear he wasn't enjoying it. When the fox caught up with everyone, he silently bowed his head to his Jinchuriki. "It's strange to see you like this," Kurama muttered in a deep voice. "Just don't tell me that you're sad about me." "Don't talk nonsense," the demon barked, then immediately softened. "We just work well together. That's for sure." Naruto chuckled and extended his fist to Kurama. He folded his giant red fingers and returned the gesture with a slight smile on his sly face. "So we'll spend eternity together?" the guy asked, smiling slightly. "It seems so," nodded the fox. The teacher asked in surprise, "How did you find us so quickly?" "I sensed your chakra because I was near Konoha. Once you resurrected Naruto, it wasn't hard to detect. Were you following us?" Kakashi raised an eyebrow suspiciously. The demon became a little embarrassed and answered with a rough tone in his voice. "I just wanted to make sure that Shikaka wouldn't try to be mean again." And, as if urging them on, a small piece of ash, resembling ash, broke off from Naruto's shoulder and flew to the ground. Sakura's technique was imperfect, and therefore couldn't hold the summoned soul for long. "We need to hurry," the teacher spoke quickly. "Kurama, I'm going to seal you now." "I didn't know you knew sealing techniques," Naruto muttered in surprise. "I thought only my father could do them." "Don't forget, the fourth was my sensei," Kakashi smiled warmly. "Besides, I have thousands of different jutsu in my arsenal." Another tiny particle flew out of the crack on Naruto's cheek and, caught by the wind, was carried away somewhere into the distance. Sakura swallowed nervously. The teacher closed his eyes, concentrated, and quickly performed the necessary hand seals. Then he placed his palm on the ground. Symbols began to spread from his fingers, simultaneously, in both directions. As soon as they reached Naruto and Kurama, they formed a blinding glow beneath both of them. This unnatural light then intensified, engulfing only the demon alone. At the last moment, Sakura saw the fox's triumphant smile. A second later, Naruto's body was sucked into the Ninetales. The boy barely managed to stay on his feet, clutching his chest. The sudden movement caused another couple dozen particles to fall off him. "Naruto," Sakura muttered. "Let's hurry." She approached her friend again and hugged him tightly. How much she wanted to say, but there was no time for long goodbyes. "Please say hello to Sasuke for me. Wait for me. One day, Team 7 will be reunited again. Just take your time, Sakura. Make sure you live a long life. And yes, if you become Hokage instead of me, I'll be very happy." My friend smiled. Kakashi also approached the guy and squeezed his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Naruto." "Don't bother, Sensei," the student replied cheerfully. "Don't be sad about us, Databeo. Otherwise, I'll be very sad in the next world. And I don't want to be sad anymore. And coming closer to Sakura, Naruto asked a little more quietly and seriously, "Tell all of our people that I love them very much." Then he extended his hand to the girl, extending his index and middle fingers. The particles of his resurrected body began to fall from the boy's body more and more rapidly. The kunoichi nodded, feeling a hot tear on her cheek. She repeated the gesture, touching Naruto's icy hand. A brief moment, and the branches of the cursed tree began to break with a deafening roar.